rolling?
We are.
What's the first thing you think of when I mention the name Scott Morrison?
Well, everyone calls him ScoMo, we know that. A little phrase that sums him up, a family man.
Scotty from marketing. It's just always been the way that he's just always trying to get the best image he can out there, purely for the cameras.
Sometime in the next few months, voters like these will decide Scott Morrison's fate.
He's tried really hard given the extraordinary circumstances.
Dynamic, friendly, approachable.
I'd go with stubborn. Yeah.
Wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him.
Scott Morrison's Prime Ministership has been a rollercoaster ride, tested by natural disaster, economic upheaval and political scandal.
Thank you, friends. Thank you, friends.
With the election looming, Four Corners spoke to people in key electorates across the country who say they are still deciding who will get their vote.
Hello, my name's Stephen. I live in the northern suburbs of Perth.
I am from Western Sydney.
I live in Morayfield, Queensland.
I'm from the southeast suburbs of Melbourne.
住在墨尔本。
Tonight, we examine Scott Morrison's record through the eyes of these voters and the issues they say will influence their vote.
Leadership.
The COVID-19 response.
How the government spends our money.
The environment.
I need a leader that shows integrity.
And we hear from the pundits about the challenges facing the Prime Minister.
Campaigning is one of his great strengths. You know, he's a master at it. So they would be relying on him again to show that.
A lot of those new things about whether or not he's daggy dad, you know, how many kids he's got, all of that sort of stuff will not play well second time round. You can't do newness twice.
He's the master of the slogan and the catchphrase. What he's learnt in the Prime Ministership is sometimes the slogan and the catchphrase can be weaponised against you.
What's the first thing you remember about Scott Morrison?
I think it was probably during the time when they were plotting to get rid of Malcolm Turnbull. So that's really when I think he came to the fore as the dark horse in the mix.
Well, good afternoon.
How Scott Morrison became Prime Minister is still fresh in the minds of some voters.
Can you rule out having any leadership ambitions?
Me?
Yeah.
This is my leader.
There you go. And I'm ambitious for him. Yeah, good on you. Thanks, ScoMo.
Morrison's pledge of loyalty right before taking the leadership has fuelled enduring questions about how he operates.
It wasn't like it just came out of nowhere. There had been a lot of pre-planning, premeditating. He wasn't the accidental Prime Minister.
How do you think that affected people's view of the Prime Minister and his trustworthiness?
I don't think it had anything to do with the trustworthiness. It had everything to do with, hey, there's a new bloke here. He's not Malcolm Turnbull. He's interesting. And what's he got to say? So it was like a breath of fresh air because the coalition was in terrible, terrible trouble under Malcolm Turnbull.
I remember him having his arm over his shoulder and saying, "This is my leader," and then 3 days later, he was the new Prime Minister. And so when you say one thing and then 3 days later, you're, obviously doing something else, then, yeah, this tells me that that's a career politician.
Character's very important to me, and integrity, and just the way that it all happened, it just really smelt a little bit for me.
And what did that make you think about Scott Morrison?
Just the fact that he would do whatever it took to become leader of this country.
Hey, Isaac. Good to see you, mate.
Scott Morrison's energetic campaigning style earned him the nickname Scotty from marketing. courtesy of the satirical website The Batuta Advocate.
Well, the first time we saw Scott Morrison as Scotty from marketing, I guess, was on the election campaign. Probably, it was the Easter Sunday, but it was after they'd gotten all the policy out of the way, you know? So now this is just how much of a human am I in the election campaign. He took them to his church down there in Cronulla, which is a Pentecostal church, and we've all seen the images. They've been relayed around, hand in the air, eyes closed. Very Pentecostal, but not overdone. And from there, took the cameras with him and his family, went straight to the Easter show. Dagwood dogs, cans of Cokes, he's on the rides, he's on the swings, he's the show bag pavilion, he's redlining. That was when we were like, fuck, righto, what's Shorten done today? And we go look up what Shorten had done today.
And he went for a run, which, you know, I guess is, in the scheme of things, is not as relatable, I don't think, as, you know, desecrating your body with a Dagwood dog and a can of Coke.
I have always believed in miracles. I'm standing with the three biggest miracles in my life here tonight. And tonight we've been delivered another one.
Defying the polls, Scott Morrison pulled off a narrow election victory, winning over voters with his everyman image. What would you say Scott Morrison stands for?
I think he stands for like traditional Australian values, and he cares about the economy. So I think he really puts Australia first.
I know he stands for his family. They're very, very important to him. He loves the Cronulla Sharks, I know that. And he is a man of faith, I know that. But I don't really know what else he would stand up for. What Scott Morrison would say, look, this is the line in the sand, this is it.
I respect people who have religious views, whatever they are. I don't care if they're Catholic, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, and he does have strong views, and that's a good thing. That's a tick in the box. As far, I don't necessarily have to agree with his church or his views, but I think that is a good aspect of his persona.
The first major test of Scott Morrison's leadership was the Black Summer Bushfires that began in 2019.
The first thing I remember about him is him being in Hawaii on a holiday while Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia and Western Australia have got these massive bushfires. It's a massive bushfire or there's bushfires, and there's bushfires all across the country, and he's having a holiday and showing absolutely no leadership. And it seemed to be almost an attitude of, well, I'm on holiday, don't disturb me.
No one denies that Prime Ministers or any public servant is entitled to leave, right? And under other circumstances, he would have trotted off and we probably wouldn't have known very much because, yes, government goes on regardless of the Prime Minister's presence. It was just a really bad call that he didn't come back, right? Oh, I'm on holiday in Hawaii, having a wonderful time. East coast of Australia is burning to a cinder.
As a public servant, given that he then took a holiday at that time when everyone was struggling, that was a really bad move in terms of image, which in politics is pretty much everything.
At that time, I was a bit disappointed because at such a critical moment, in my opinion, he should be fighting with us or on the front line.
It's sad, isn't it, when you can't have a holiday at Christmas time when your family gets you into trouble. But, yeah, be that as it may, people thought he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I think most quiet Australians understand that Prime Minister's entitled to have a holiday at some stage. Now, it just so happened that the fires got worse and worse, so he had to come back. Obviously, he had to come back.
Morrison's explanation only made things worse.
Was it a mistake not to announce that you were going on leave?
I think on this occasion, John, because there have been such horrendous events, that has understandably caused a lot of anxiety, and I deeply regret that, and so does Jenny. But I know Australians understand this, and they'll be pleased I'm coming back, I'm sure. But they know that, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in the control room. No. That's the brave people who do that are doing that job.
He gave that immortal quote about, "I don't hold a hose, mate." I think that will go on his political epitaph. Nobody expected him to go out and fight the fires. Well, no, they didn't, but they did expect him to be here.
He's the master of the slogan and the catchphrase. What he's learnt in the Prime Ministership is sometimes the slogan and the catchphrase can be weaponised against you. And "I don't hold a hose, mate" is a classic example. If you sort of look at it as a piece of communication, it's clear, crisp, concise. It tells the voter what you are or not doing. But it's become a bit of insignia of his Prime Ministership because it's that sense of absence that this guy is sometimes absent, and at moments when the country would assume you would be present.
There were uncomfortable scenes when he toured a bushfire-ravaged community on his return.
Hello, how are you?
I'm only shaking your hand if you give more funding to our RFS. So many people here have lost their homes.
How come we only had 4 trucks to defend our town? Because our town doesn't have a lot of money, but we have hearts of gold, Mr Prime Minister.
No Liberal votes. You're out, son. You are out. You're Bye.
So that is when the country was going through a big crisis. And at that point of time, you definitely see that the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, didn't rise up to the level of what is expected from a Prime Minister that way. So I didn't think that he handled it really good, and that didn't speak very high of him as a person as well as a leader in that particular instant.
It was definitely indicating, his level of disconnectedness with what was happening in Australia, which is poor leadership.
Tonight, Australia's first confirmed case of coronavirus. A man is treated in a Melbourne hospital. A number of cases in New South Wales are considered probable.
The COVID-19 pandemic has been the greatest challenge of Scott Morrison's Prime Ministership.
I think he really redeemed himself when COVID-19 started, and the way that he wasn't trying to shy away from it. He was front and centre. He wasn't afraid to front the media. He was doing his daily interviews. So I think that was a great redeeming factor, and that then showed, okay, yes, he is a leader.
A travel ban will be placed on all non-residents, non-Australian citizens coming to Australia, and that will be in place from 9 p.m. tomorrow evening.
Many voters say they supported Scott Morrison's decision to close the international borders.
Shutting down a country, shutting the borders is a dramatic move, and I'm sure he would have taken a big breath before he would have gone up and made that announcement. And good on him for standing up there and letting us know exactly what he thought.
Obviously, I'm from England, so I compare the way that it was handled here compared to how it was handled in the UK. And I've got nothing but praise for shutting the borders. We're an island, and that's what saved us in the early stages.
Good afternoon, everyone. Now is the time to dig deep.
The Morrison government's next move was an economic stimulus program worth more than $300 billion.
With $130 billion of support on top of the almost $70 billion already put in, and the support to financial markets, this is as an extraordinary level of support in extraordinary times.
It was extraordinary, really extraordinary. You know, we've had generations of coalition governments saying, look, we've got to be very careful with every dollar we spend. Let's not go into debt. Let's not have a big deficit. And all of a sudden, because of the health crisis, that sort of thinking was quite odd. The alternate was, yes, you can be philosophically pure and half the country would be out of work. Well, that's terrible. That would have been terrible. But he put dogma and philosophy in his back pocket and looked at what he had to do as a Prime Minister.
It was good policy. It was necessary. People were losing jobs and businesses were going under, and it was only through the JobKeeper that they could actually keep people employed. And so that was super important.
So I think he's tried very hard there. He possibly threw maybe way too much money in there, possibly not looked at the longer term impact of what this is going to do for Australians in, say, 20 or 30 years down the track.
I think this is a very good measure. After all, the pandemic is making life hard for everyone, especially people like us. Small business owners are really feeling the pinch. With this financial subsidy, we can fare a little bit better.
To be perfectly honest, I don't really know how it could have been handled any better. I feel that the handling of the economy was actually very good.
Ready to go?
Yeah. Mr. Prime Minister, today we're in the COVID-19 Pfizer vaccine. You've had a chance to look through the consent form. Any questions or issues?
No, I'm ready to go.
Ready to go.
Just like the country.
Excellent.
Praise for his government's economic response has been blunted by accusations of a bungled vaccine rollout.
All done for you. All good.
But we're already at over 650,000. I expect by next week we'll be into the million. And each week the distribution and the vaccination dosage gets stronger and stronger and stronger. We're on track for our first dose for everyone by the end of October. And so, you know, it's not a race, it's not a competition. I'm not interested in, you know, this state and that state. I'm interested in Australians being vaccinated safely with appropriate care and support given to all of them.
He did quite a good job through the COVID to steer the country through the COVID. But again, there were some fiascos regarding the vaccination. We started the vaccination pretty late compared to some of the other countries. But again, that thing picked up, and even the community responded quite well with all the vaccination going for all the vaccination, double vaccination, all those things.
A lot of people do criticise Scott Morrison for his lack of foresight, if you like, where he didn't buy enough Pfizer vaccine. And I'm actually going to defend him a little bit here because, you know, we got the AstraZeneca deal to manufacture it in Melbourne. Nobody knew that was going to end up causing issues where that was actually going to be phased out. So to be totally fair to him, I think his plan was AstraZeneca will be the panacea for everybody and we make it here. So, you know, I think some of the criticism is a little unfair about not buying enough Pfizer vaccine. Geez, we didn't have a crystal ball, did we?
Please join me in welcoming Prime Minister Scott Morrison.
With most of the country double vaccinated and the economy showing signs of recovery, Scott Morrison is putting economic management front and centre at the coming election.
A strong economy means a stronger future, and this cannot be taken for granted. As we approach this year's election, this means strong economic management is more important than ever.
We all know that a Liberal government is about economy, so I still feel that they're doing a great job when it comes to economy.
I think based on how he's performed with the JobKeeper and all the other various incentives, I do think I have some trust in him in handling the economy side of things, yeah.
He doesn't manage the economy, Josh does.
as far as I'm aware. So I like Josh. I think he's done a good job in the face of, what he's had to go through. But isn't that why he has a treasurer?
Not him, but his team. And so I think that they have a superior offering to the alternative in terms of what Josh Frydenberg can offer.
Well, thanks, everyone.
Throughout his prime ministership, Scott Morrison has been hit by a series of damaging scandals, which have raised questions about his willingness to be held to account.
He does not accept any mistakes. So he just tries to go round in order to justify what his actions were. But he really does not accept any mistakes. I just own up if I have done something wrong, because we are all human beings. We can make mistakes, but not from his mouth. I've never heard it.
In the so-called sports rorts affair, the Morrison government was accused of using taxpayer money to try to influence votes.
Will you resign?
That is absolutely ridiculous. This is a highly successful program that's delivering real benefits on the ground.
Well, basically the Audit Office said that the funding had been allocated on colour-coded spreadsheets and doled out disproportionately to marginal seats that would benefit the coalition at the election. So the finding basically was of a cowboy process.
We're going to roll out another 60.
Despite the Audit Office findings, Scott Morrison refused to sack the Minister Bridget McKenzie or acknowledge any wrongdoing.
Mr Morrison, as the leader of that minister that made that decision, I think behind closed doors should have had that sort of discussion, as happens in many, many workplaces from all around the country and all around the world. But then he should have taken swift action, and he should have been upfront.
Well, accountability is the most important thing, because you represent the people and they've shown their faith in you by electing you to be Prime Minister. So transparency and clear communication and, admitting your mistakes when you make them, they're all very important.
How accountable do you think Scott Morrison has been?
How accountable? Well, he likes to pretend he doesn't know when he hasn't got an answer to things. Or when he knows he's done something that he shouldn't have done, or he's basically not done his job properly. So, look, he hasn't handled some of those things very well at all. But again, it's happened in the past, it'll probably happen again.
Scott Morrison's approach to ministerial accountability was tested again when his Attorney General Christian Porter was accused of historical rape allegations, which he vehemently denied.
But I can say categorically that what has been put in various forms in allegations simply did not happen.
The Prime Minister stood by him.
I spoke to the Attorney yesterday, and I'm pleased that he's taking some time to get support, and I'm looking forward to him returning to his duties once that period of leave is completed. The police have dealt with this matter and given us their understanding of these issues and their status, and as has been the case on other occasions, that's where the rule of law completes its process.
The former Attorney General, I suppose, when that thing had come up for a public figure, he should have been shoved out before anything. That's what has happened to, our Premier in New South Wales. So before anything has, if the allegation has come in, that person needs to move out of office.
And there was the related issue of him funding a part of his legal fees through a blind trust. What did you think of that?
Again, I thought the lack of transparency there was suspicious, and to make a point of actually not making that become public was just terrible. Was really bad PR.
How do you think Scott Morrison handled that issue?
Look, I don't think he did. Didn't Christian Porter end up resigning on his own without actually being pushed? You deal, if you're a strong leader, you deal with people like that with a firm hand and not wait for them to make the call themselves.
Scott Morrison has made much of being the father of two girls, who often seeks the counsel of his wife, Jenny. Yet the Prime Minister is accused of having a tin ear when it comes to understanding or empathising with women. Brittany Higgins' allegation that she was raped by a fellow Liberal Party staffer in a ministerial office rocked the government.
I said yesterday in the Parliament that we had to listen to Brittany. I have listened to Brittany. Jenny and I spoke last night, and she said to me, you have to think about this as a father first. What would you want to happen if it were our girls? Jenny has a way of clarifying things, always has.
Nobody liked what he said. Realistically, he shouldn't have to ask his wife for her opinion so that he could adopt her opinion. He should have his own opinion, and it should be the same as most people, where it's just wrong. It shouldn't be tolerated. Why should he have to ask his wife?
And what did that make you think about, Scott Morrison?
Well, the first thought that came into my mind is who is running this country, ScoMo or Jenny?
What did that tell you, if anything, about Scott Morrison?
I think it comes back to this idea that he thinks because he's got a wife and two daughters, he understands women's issues, which is not really the case at all. He's just a sort of bloke. I mean, I don't think there's anything malicious or whatever about his attitude. It's just a standard white, middle-class, male attitude.
Again, Morrison's response to the thousands of protesters outside Parliament only made things worse.
The Prime Minister on indulgence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On indulgence. It is good and right, Mr. Speaker, that so many are able to gather here in this way, whether in our capital or elsewhere, and to do so peacefully to express their concerns and their very genuine and real frustrations. Not far from here, such marches, even now, are being met with bullets, but not here in this country, Mr. Speaker. Not here in this country.
Statements like that, they're just so divisive and will be used against him for sure in the upcoming election for sure.
And what did that tell you?
I don't know if it just told me that he just doesn't think sometimes before he speaks, but it was so inappropriate, such an inappropriate thing to say. Poor judgment.
I think even he would concede every now and again with some of those difficult issues. Some of the language has probably not been 100% perfect. But again, look at the outcome. There is an entire new process in Parliament House put in there to protect staff, and particularly to protect women.
I think Mr. Morrison should be well placed. I know he has daughters and he has a loving wife, and they come across as a really good family unit. However, when it has come and things start to come to light, I saw a lot of trying to apply spin to these allegations. It just doesn't come across well. It's not leadership material.
Of all the criticisms of Scott Morrison, it's the charge that he is a liar that he has found one of the hardest to shake. It's a line ruthlessly prosecuted by Labor to attack his character.
Well, this is an extraordinary, of course, backflip. Scott Morrison lied about electric vehicles at the last election, and now he's lying about electric vehicles.
The liar from the Shire is at it again, this time on petrol and interest rates.
This Prime Minister has a problem with just telling the truth, and it's a real problem for the nation.
Scott Morrison's honesty was challenged on the international stage when French President Emmanuel Macron accused the Prime Minister of lying to him about cancelling a submarine contract.
Do you think he lied to you? I don't think. I know.
Morrison has rejected Macron's claim.
The problem for Scott Morrison was that the French president's character assessment came at a stage in the political cycle where Australian voters are asking themselves that question: does our Prime Minister tell the truth? Is he straightforward? Can he be trusted?
I've known the Prime Minister longer than most people, and I've always found him very straight. So we got a French president who was facing an election who didn't like being dumped, and his submarines being dumped. He came up with that line. I don't think anyone could actually say the Prime Minister lied anywhere. You know, say some people don't like the answer, big deal. But it's not a lie.
Do you think Scott Morrison lies?
Yes. Easily.
Why?
Oh, my goodness. You just got to look at the recent issue with the submarines and the way that Mr Macron dealt with him. You know, whatever side of politics you're on, there's no way that he would have taken the approach he did with Scott Morrison had he not lied. And I'm sure there's countless other events, but I think that's my concern. He lies very easily.
If the French Prime Minister is calling that out, then I'm sure he does. Like, I mean, given that I think he may lie by omission in some cases, but given that some of his scandals and things like that, I think, yeah, he would definitely lie.
And what does that make you think?
Oh, that makes it very difficult to trust him.
The accusation arose again 3 days ago, when a year-old text message from Barnaby Joyce was leaked, branding Scott Morrison a hypocrite and a liar.
I should never have written the text that I did. My view from the backbench about the Prime Minister was based on assumption and commentary, not from a one-on-one working relationship.
People attack him about being a liar. I wouldn't go as far as saying necessarily a liar, but I think in some cases he's sly. So I don't think he always tells everything 100% because he's got other motives.
I think it comes to the definition of what lying really is, and about being, whether that's for personal gain or not, but it's about integrity. And if he has changed his mind in relation to a call, then that's fine, but let us know.
Do you think Scott Morrison lies?
Isn't there an old joke that says, how do you know a politician is lying? When his lips are moving? I don't think any politician is without sin on that one.
Are there circumstances when lying is acceptable?
No. Not when you're in a position of power like that. Yeah. You need to be accountable for your words.
Climate change is consistently ranked as an important issue for many voters. It's been a significant challenge for Scott Morrison, a strong defender of fossil fuels.
Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared.
The Treasurer knows the rule on crops.
It's coal. It was dug up by men and women who work and live in the electorates of those who sit opposite.
Australians' actions on climate change.
In recent months, Scott Morrison has embraced a net zero emissions target.
That is the Australian way. Australians understand and they support the need to take action on climate change. So do I. So does our government. Our plan to reach what will be our new official target of reaching net zero emissions by 2050, our plan gets the balance right.
What's your opinion of Scott Morrison's record on climate policy?
Well, I have to stand perhaps with the opposition in this and say glossy brochure. Glossy brochure, fix everything. We're not actually going to do anything of substance. We just pretend we are, and we go to Glasgow and we put our hand up, and but we don't actually take any decisive action.
I think he tries very hard, but I don't think he's committal. Once again, he has made the decision to walk into Parliament House with a big block of coal, slam it on the big desk there, and talk about how good coal is for the country and all that sort of thing. It's been a couple of years later, and now, after COP26 and everything going on with climate change, he's changed his view on that. But he hasn't told us why.
I don't believe that the Prime Minister is 100% when he talks about climate change and things like that, because they do it because they have to, and it feels like they're doing it in such a way that it's like, okay, look, we have to do it. What's the minimum we can get away with? Excellent, just do that.
If it's not affecting the Australian economy, I support his policy. But if the policy affected the growth of the Australian economy, then I will have reservations.
I feel that now his main focus is how he can win back the next election. So that is his focus and that is what he is aiming for. So for that, whatever he has to do, he is doing.
At the end of last year, Scott Morrison snapped into campaign mode, selling Australians an optimistic slogan.
And what they're going to see is Australia open, we're double vaxxed, and people are back, they're in their trailers, they're together again, and it's just showing where we're heading, looking out the front windscreen, not in the rearview mirror.
It is fabulous to have our Prime Minister here.
I think that's really important. We're looking through the front windscreen, not through that rear vision mirror. We have one of the strongest economies that are coming through this pandemic, and we're looking out that front windscreen going into 2022, looking strong going into next year.
Expanding on his theme in a carefully crafted pre-election pitch, Scott Morrison declared it was time for government to get out of people's lives.
And so Australians kept their side of the deal. And it is now time for governments to keep theirs. To step back and let Australians step forward. To put Australians back in charge of their own lives.
Part of it was playing up to Clive Palmer and One Nation and the demonstrations that were taking place at the time. Thousands of people out on the streets complaining about mandatory vaccinations, complaining about masks, about lockdowns. And so he was sending a message to them, I think, that yes, it is time for governments to stop telling people what to do.
Within weeks of that speech, Scott Morrison's vaunted COVID recovery was in disarray. The rapid spread of the ultra-infectious Omicron strain of the virus dashed hopes of a swift return to normality. Many voters are blaming the government.
I think in hindsight there was a lot of errors and I think there's not a lot of forward planning. If they knew that this Omicron that was running rampant in other countries and it was coming here, it was already here, then realistically there should have been some more planning put in place to deal with the rapid antigen tests and the number of people that they expect to be off work, etc., etc.
I don't think there's been much foresight trying to see what could be the next thing happening down the track. What can we possibly foresee or prepare for in future? I don't think he's done very well with that, and I think maybe people may reflect on that. Not a person who with much foresight looking ahead.
It's going to have a huge impact because it's top of everyone's mind. I mean, it's already ruining a lot of people's lives. There's a lot of doubt about the economy, about jobs, about inflation, everything. So, and the things coming to a head like this, there will definitely be a huge impact on, how people vote. So definitely a lot of people are going to start second-guessing Scott Morrison if they didn't already. A lot of people that were on the fence will now jump to the negative side of the fence. So it's not looking too good for Scott Morrison from what I can see.
The people of Australia, if I could use that we're making all the sacrifices, we're doing the hard yards, and it's not good enough now. Perhaps at the start of the pandemic, people were more forgiving of Scott Morrison and the government and state leaders as well, because we'd never gone through this before, so it was all uncharted territory. But I think, especially in Victoria and Melbourne, where we had such a hard lockdown for such a long time, it's starting to wear a bit thin.
With the election due by late May, Scott Morrison will be selling his message of optimism and prosperity in the crucial weeks ahead. His challenge is to persuade the electorate that he can be trusted to deliver on his promises. You came into this as an undecided voter. Does it remain the case?
Yeah, it is still the case. I generally do not make up my final decision until probably a couple of weeks before the election. I always have a good idea of where I think I'm going to vote, but it's a long time in politics, just a couple of weeks. A lot can change.
I guess one of the problems is that we're still a few months away from the election, and the issues of the pandemic are still clouding everything else at the moment. We can't see the wood for the trees, that old saying. Perhaps when we get a bit closer and we see a bit more hard-nosed campaigning and we get the more issues on the table, we'll be able to actually weigh up some of the policies of not just Labor and Liberal, but some of the other parties that we'd like to have a look at as well.
Well, I'm still waiting to see the cards play out. So at this stage, I'll wait and see what other information comes up and just make sure I make a well-informed decision for the federal election.
For some, recent events have hardened their views.
We need some long-term projects. We need to bring manufacturing back into Australia. And he needs to lead Australia in a way that makes it better off for him being the Prime Minister rather than what it is now, because I don't see Australia as a better place to live because of his Prime Ministership.
What would you tell Scott Morrison he needs to do to win your vote?
You know, I'm not sure if there's enough time for him to do what I want him to do, because too much time has passed. Strong leadership, can you suddenly switch on strong leadership? I would love it if that were to happen, and he was able to unite the coalition and do something about the environment, wake up to the environment and be strong.
Mr. Morrison, coming up to where we are today, I don't truly know what you stand for. The advice I could give you, Mr. Morrison, is look people in the eye and say, I'm Scott Morrison and this is what I believe in, and set your policies out. And if you don't win at the election, well, so be it. But don't try and do whatever it takes to bend the rules or bend your policies just to make people like you. You're a leader.
Next week, our voters tell us what they think about Labor leader Anthony Albanese.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the incredible honour and privilege of being the 21st leader of our great party.
When I first heard that Anthony Albanese had taken over as leader, I think my first opinion was scratching my head going, really? Is he the best they've got?
Is he Prime Minister material?
That's a funny one. I wouldn't have expected him to be leader of the opposition.
Hard to say. Is he leadership material? Haven't seen that yet.
He's a bit vanilla. He's a solid bloke. He doesn't have charisma. Perhaps I'm a person who likes charisma in our Prime Ministers. But I think he would do a solid job.
How effective would you say he has been, or he is at the moment, as opposition leader?
I wouldn't say he's been very effective at all in what I want out of an opposition leader.
What would you say Anthony Albanese stands for?
Getting elected.